I'm here in the interest of being more neighborly. I strolled over from across the street, and look, maybe if we had brought over a fruitcake when I first moved in, we would have gotten off to a better start. But I'm going to make up for it.
He's going to make up for it. President Obama spoke to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce today without the fruitcake. The same Chamber of Commerce he and his administration went to war with ahead of the midterm elections. Was the president successful in his effort to mend fences? Here to discuss. Fox Business Network stocks editor, my colleague Elizabeth McDonald, Loyola University economics professor Dan D'Amico, and Democratic strategist Sasha Burns. Sasha, to you first. You probably saw Bill O'Reilly's interview of the president right before the Super Bowl last night. Is he still the committed, hardcore left liberal that his supporters said he was, and he gave us the impression he was when he ran for president? Or did the midterm elections change him?
I don't think it's the midterm elections. I think what President Obama is more than anything is a pragmatist, which is what he showed since he first came into office. The first thing he did, one of them, was the financial bailout, which is hardly a Democrat's dream of bailing out Wall Street. When we had a bigger majority in the House and Senate, he went after progressive ideals, and now he's moving back to the center.
Dan, does anybody in the Chamber of Commerce, anybody who believes in the free market, now maybe that's an assumption that the guys in the Chamber of Commerce believe in the free market, take seriously the efforts of the biggest central planner since FDR to make nice to them?
I mean, I'm not really sure whether or not this is mostly a left or right issue or call it pragmatism. I just think it's old. It's old thinking. This isn't your grandmother's economy anymore. This framework where we have to have public infrastructure spending and fiscal stimulus to support business, I think is outdated. No one under the age of 40 necessarily wants these shovel-ready project jobs because they don't want jobs that involve shovels. They're overeducated, and their dreams of business models just involve MacBooks and Starbucks Wi-Fi connections.
Right.
We don't need government for these things.
He did say that he wanted to make sure that K through 12 was administered properly. Well, that's not in the Constitution. Does the Chamber of Commerce really want to hear that?
No, they don't want to hear that. And by the way, you got two applause lines. I don't think he's changed. I don't think he's moved to the center. Sasha makes very important points.
Right.
However, I think that, he basically is on what I would like to call the apology tour with businesses, as he did with foreign leaders when he first stepped in. He's trying to now pass the baton to the private sector. Basically it's to say, look, you take over job creation. That baton, though, is a stick of dynamite with rules fizzing out the top of it. The regulatory workforce in the government has grown 16% under the president.
Sasha, did you disagree with the premise of my question to Dan D'Amico? The biggest central planner of the economy since FDR, just in the financial regulatory bill and Obamacare alone, is 4,000 pages of regulations and 400 new regulatory boards, each of which will have its own office and its own staff and its own budget and its own ability to write its own rules and create exemptions to those rules. We haven't seen anything like this since 1933.
Well, first of all, I think everyone's talking about this letter from Governor Daniels. He was talking about having more audits and more bureaucracies put over the government in terms of having outside contractors look at things. I think, yes, I disagree with the premise. I also...
Well, how can you challenge the facts that I have given you? 4,000 pieces of legislation, 400 new boards, health care. Well, look, if you go to your dentist and he drills your children's teeth and the bill is $1,000 and you want to pay $250 a month, the federal government has to approve that financial relationship. That's ridiculous, isn't it?
The 4,000 pages of legislation, first of all. There's tons of legislation that never moves anywhere. All of this idea that there is such a new layer, I think, comes out of the new situation that we're in. The financial stimulus was about saving us from going into a terrible depression. A third of it was tax cuts. So there's something about when Republicans cut taxes, it's not government spending. But when Obama does, it's government spending.
On the same subject.
Well, you know, he was talking a lot about, the president was talking about infrastructure spending. Look, the Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century was not created by government spending. It was private capitalists. It was, in fact, the robber barons who built the railroad system, for example, in this country, that did create the economic boom at that time. Can we get back to that kind of thinking? That's going to be difficult to do.
All right, well, I'll tell you somewhere where we're not getting back to that type of thinking. Small government solutions seem to be sweeping America as more and more governors, even Democratic governors, look to severe budget cuts instead of tax increases as a way to solve deficit issues. Will the federal government get on board? Professor D'Amico, are you surprised to hear people like Governor Cuomo of New York, Governor Brown of California say, I'm not going to raise taxes, I'm going to cut services and cut the budget in order to balance my budget?
I'm not surprised to hear about these types of cuts. I mean, we're in what would be called some form of a constitutional moment. These massive financial crises and deficits that these states are occurring, they can't be sustainable, and we're realizing that in new ways. But what I am a little bit concerned about is that if we significantly cut certain areas of government spending without cutting blanket across the board, we're going to end up with a very different face of state government, a much more police state as opposed to public service state.
Even Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey, who is the champion at budget cutting, is not suggesting cutting anything from the police, as Dan says, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
yeah, that's an important point. I don't think we'll have a police state, though. But look, you know, there's this whole idea now in Washington that's becoming in vogue, and that is allowing states to declare bankruptcy judge. And I see that. You want to try to get the unions in court to make them restate and restructure their very lucrative pension contracts. But to stop spending, you don't, you know, let me back up. You don't have to have liver failure to cure alcoholism. You can get the states to knuckle under. Look at, we wouldn't have had West Germany and Japan existing today if they did not go through their fiscal austerity that they did after World War II, and the U.S. did as well.
Should the federal government relieve the states of some of their Medicare burdens?
I don't want the federal government to relieve the states of anything until they deal with their own fiscal houses. So I approve of all the spending cuts, of any tax increases that they need to, as long as it's not my state, and of dealing with the unions like Governor Cuomo is.
And dealing with the unions like Governor Cuomo is. You're a liberal Democrat, and you're telling me that Democratic governors can deal with unions? What about Chris Christie in New Jersey?
I think that, like I said, the states are going to have to deal with what their problems are. In terms of the unions, it's tough. If you have a contract, you can't break the contract, but you can change how things go forward.
Dan D'Amico, Sasha Burns, EMAC, thank you for joining us, guys. Up next, the plain truth about the president's solemn obligation to uphold the Constitution. Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Are the freedoms guaranteed in the Constitution truly guaranteed? Or are they subject to the whim of politicians and the folks they hire to do the government's work? Tonight, President Obama and the Constitution. We all know that whenever anyone begins working for the government, any government in America, he or she takes an oath to uphold the Constitution. The Constitution clearly states that if the government wants anyone's life, liberty, or property, it can't just take it. It must sue the person and persuade a jury that the government is entitled to what it seeks. Regrettably, virtually every government since the presidency of George Washington has violated this principle. Some violations have been far worse than others. John Adams arrested people for criticizing him. Lincoln taxed incomes even though the Constitution prohibited that, and killed civilians because they lived in homes through which his armies wanted to pass. FDR arrested people on the basis of race, stole gold from all who admitted owning it, and began the central planning of the economy, and the Supreme Court let him do it. George W. Bush tried to build a penal colony at Guantanamo Bay where no law applied, and the Supreme Court stopped him. In the past 2 years, here is what President Obama has done. He has signed into law legislation that forces people to buy a product, health insurance, that they may not want or need, and will take money from them if they don't buy it. He has promoted and signed legislation that forces the states to raise their taxes and then tells them how to spend the money. He has approved legislation that will require the federal approval of a federal bureaucrat whenever you pay your dentist over time or enter into an investment agreement with some of your friends. He He has borrowed over $4 trillion and given that money to favored banks and industries and saddled future generations with the obligation to pay the loans back and saddled us, the present-day taxpayers, with the interest payments. Yet when asked by my colleague Bill O'Reilly last night, shortly before the Super Bowl, if he is a committed leftist who wants to redistribute wealth, he denied it absolutely. Take a listen.
Here's what the Wall Street Journal said. I want you to react to this quote. Mr. Obama is a determined man of the left, whose goal is to redistribute much larger levels of income across society. He may give tactical ground when he has to, as he did on taxes to avoid a middle-class tax increase, but he will resist to his last day any major changes to Obamacare and the other load-bearing walls of the entitlement state. Do you deny their assessment? Do you deny that you're a man?
Absolutely, he said. In my view, O'Reilly's question was right on the mark. And the president proved the falsity of his answer to O'Reilly just 18 hours later when he told the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that he wants the federal government to pay for everything from kindergarten through 12th grade education to a college education, to bridges and highways in states that voted for him, to health care for those who need it. And he wants to use the tax code to regulate the behavior and free choices of businesses. Since FDR stole life, liberty, and property in the Great Depression and during World War II, and a cowed Supreme Court let him do so, presidents from both parties simply disregard the most basic parts of the Constitution. They don't care what it says. They reject its limitations. They want to redistribute wealth because they think it will win them more votes than letting wealth grow through the free market. President Obama, despite what he says, is the champion of big government and transfers of wealth. We can endure 2 more years of him because we have a Republican House of Representatives that can say no. That, of course, presumes that the Republicans in the House will stick to their small government, sound money, fidelity to the Constitution values. Tomorrow, one of the most faithful to those values, Congressman Scott Garrett of New Jersey, will be here to give us a roadmap of what we can expect to come in the next 2 years. From New York, defending freedom every night of the week. So long, America.